We all know that change is inevitable, but life has a funny way of reminding you of such things. Like, for example, going through security at the airport without taking your shoes off. That is now considered a luxury. Or an in-house tuner from Germany. Their flagship vehicle is now an SUV. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, you and I accept that life changes. What does that mean this is? Is it an entirely new vehicle? Well, not exactly. You see, this is built off the BMW X7 platform, meaning the length, the wheelbase, all the same. So here, the actual packaging space is very similar to like a BMW 7 Series or a Mercedes S-Class. Then they turn it into a BMW XM. And that means every body panel changes, as well as the propulsion system. The X7 is on offer as a 6-cylinder or a 4.4 twin-turbo V8. This is only on offer as a plug-in hybrid with that 4.4 twin-turbo V8. Then it adds an electric motor that sits in the transmission housing, as well as a 25.7 kilowatt-hour battery. That works in conjunction with a 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger. As you can imagine, not a whole hell of a lot of full EV range, 30 miles in the US. Then there's the look of the vehicle. I don't have any really good way to describe it. You could say bodacious, you could say it's like driving around in a BMW X7 with your hair on fire. Actually, that's what we're going with. But then there's the performance figures, and there it is indeed an M car. 0 to 60, 4.1 seconds for something this large, and VMAX 155 miles an hour. Then you could go through the option list and change that VMAX to 168 miles an hour. So if you put all of that together, this, not lightweight, 6,062 pounds, or depending on how you express your weights and measures, 2,752 kilograms with that. Oh my God. Jesus! This, okay, when I read that this thing would be 6,000 pounds, I'm thinking, okay, it's gonna be sort of quick, but maybe there's gonna be hesitation, but that, it bites. It bites a lot. This thing, the only way to describe this thing, this is badass. Okay, that's all fine and good, but let's put it aside and understand why it's badass. Well, there's the obvious of that V8 that we've experienced in many other M cars. Put that aside, then we've got the electric motor we've been talking about, but then more importantly, it's the transmission. And yeah, it's the 8-speed, but it's not the torque converter 8-speed that we've experienced from the new M4 all the way up to the M5 CS. Instead, this has a wet multi-plate clutch. Now, why is that important? Well, it's kind of catching up to the dual clutch systems we've experienced in Mercedes as well as in Porsche. But here, there's a difference. This is designed in to work with that electric motor. And yeah, you do notice the shifts more. Yes, we have more precision, it's more direct, but you notice off the line, this thing accelerates crazy fast, which is unusual for a vehicle that weighs over 6,000 pounds. And to put that in perspective, that's 1,000 pounds heavier than an X5 or an X6M, which already was fast. So let me put this in a bit of a different light. One has more control over the acceleration and deceleration, if you think about it, in aggressive driving situations, because you can always do the input of upshifts. You never get denials there. It's downshifts where you get some denials, less than you do in the torque converter version of this same transmission. Put yet another way, I'm very much looking forward to this version of the 8-speed in future applications of M cars, hopefully versions that are more nimble, translated about 2,000 pounds lighter. So in the tech review of this same vehicle, we spent a lot of time talking about the details on the interior. However, there is one significant change here we need to go back to, and that is, where is the back seat? Because this is not trying to be a 3-row crossover, so you don't need to package a 3rd row. So what they've done is they've taken the rear seat and they've moved it farther back. So yeah, there's more space here, but it almost feels like a Maybach on the inside because you sit at or behind the seat pillar. So there's this way bigger space or feeling of space. Then they have some party tricks like throw pillars that are made of suede, or the roof. Now that looks like a sunshade for a panoramic sunroof. Turns out you cannot get a panoramic sunroof, or even a regular sunroof at all. Instead, they've opted for this light show. I'd love to show it to you, but it's a little too sunny outside. Then they apply a stylized texture that's repeated throughout the entire vehicle. That in turn is built upon the ambient lighting like we see in the doors as well as the dashboard. But here they do something different. Yeah, you can change the color, but upon startup, there's this whole pageantry type light show that's specific to the XM. Now there are some other party tricks with this similar design idea. Outside, this is all about style, and yes, I will admit, very polarizing. It's a love it or hate it design. I am one of the few people that absolutely loves it, but huge hinweis here. It's all about the color one selects. This is the Dravit Gray we've seen on the BMW, I think it was the M8 convertible we drove back in the day. It works beautifully here in the sunlight, but it doesn't work as well without the bronze trim that we saw, and believe it or not, the green car in Palm Springs. Here on the drive, they had a red one with a gold trim, looked great. Blue with the gold trim, looked great. Blue with black, not so much. The worst color by far is the white. It shows the heft of the vehicle. Then there are the details. Like, look at the door handles. Even these are stylized. This is repeated throughout the entire vehicle, all the way through the ceiling as well as on the back here. And then speaking of the back of the vehicle, nothing to do with the design outside or frankly inside, more of an accessory. So that onboard charger, you got to put it somewhere. Why not put it in a stylish carrying case? Dare I say, it almost looks like a Louis Vuitton bag, just not as garish. This was designed in-house, and it kind of ties into details like the 3D tail lamps. This literally pops out of the back of the vehicle. Details like this is what sets the vehicle apart. Now let's press on to what could only be considered as the Achilles heel of a vehicle that weighs over 6,000 pounds, and that is driving dynamics. Specifically in applications like this, very aggressive driving. And here I am incredibly surprised. The active roll stabilization here pays huge dividends. If you remember, in the X5 and the X6M, the active roll stabilization there, it's a 12-volt system. It's not architected like the ones in Porsches and Mercedes, and as such, it doesn't work incredibly well. Here is a completely different story. I know there is a huge amount of confusion to any like real car guys or real M car guys, like how could they make this the second standalone M car? Now working in conjunction with all of that is a four-wheel steering system. Now why is that important? Well, yeah, it adds to the high-speed stability, but I would argue it's like a suite of technologies, in this case engineering technologies, that work together. It's the active roll stabilization, and I'd go so far as to saying it's also the controllability of the hybrid propulsion system that doesn't necessarily make it feel lighter than 6,000 pounds, it just feels lighter on its feet. Now, all is not puppy dogs and roses, depending on how you look at it. The ride quality, incredibly stiff. To some, that's a bad thing. To the folks that are carting the Rugrats back and forth to school, an X7 would be a better tool for the job, because you notice all of the changes that we discussed to make it do what we are doing. You feel that in the ride quality. I personally like that. And frankly, that's the way an M car should drive. But that is a huge hinweis here, that it feels different going down the road, that you feel the tires, you feel the steering, you feel the weight in the steering, and that is a good thing. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the options game with today's contestant, something that could be referred to as the biggest M car ever, the BMW XM, for a base price of $159,000. Now what you are looking at is Dravit Gray. It is a lovely color. There are lovelier colors on offer. One that has a more aged look to it. You saw it in our tech review of the XM from Palm Springs. It works with a blue interior, believe it or not. Anyway, cannot tell you what the pricing of that is. We'll have to get the car back in California and go through all the details. And the only other thing we pay extra for is the destination and handling. Unlike other M cars, not von Deutschland, rather from the exotic port of call of Spartanburg, South Carolina. May I suggest visiting the Beacon Inn if you ever visit. That is $995, which brings us to a total retail price of $159,995, I think. Now, come the fall, they're going to make two changes. Number one, they're going to have 50 individual color options. And number two, they're going to have something called a label red, which is going to increase the output from the already ridiculous amount of output to 735 horsepower, 0 to 60, 3.9 seconds. Okay, so I must apologize because I've wanted to drive this very aggressively on this stunning road outside of Cave Creek, Arizona. If you've never heard of it, highly suggest you visit. With that, let's switch to Sunshine because this is a plug-in hybrid. There are three modes. There's obviously hybrid, there's e-control, and there's electric. Now you and I are in electric. And with that, let's discuss that e-control mode. What exactly is it? Well, e-control is like a hold mode on Porsches and Mercedes where you can hold the charge so you can drive on, say, the freeway and keep the charge for when you're driving around town, which is fine and all. But some of these systems actually do charge when you're driving around. This system doesn't, so that was a very specific decision by the engineers at BMW. You see, in different parts of the world, this e-control mode does something different. In the US, it only holds the charge. In Europe, it will charge the battery. Now, why did they take this decision? Well, the logic was by having it charge the battery, it would use more fuel, and in the US, they were going for better fuel economy, hence the reason it's hold and not charge. Me personally, I don't think the people that are driving this vehicle are that fussed about the fuel economy. They would want the charge, even in the US. Perhaps that's something they need to look at. In terms of the way it drives in EV mode, it's just quieter. Now, the idea of it being quiet, that's a choice. One can change that. Like, for example, I can go into the setup and I can change this to turn on what's called iconic sounds, and that's something you and I played around with the i7. Same thing here. Interesting tidbit of information. The iconic sounds, they were composed by Hans Zimmer. Yes, that Hans Zimmer. And under full load, you can hear the iconic sound a bit more, which brings us to an interesting programming aspect of this EV mode. In most plug-in hybrid systems like this that have a full EV mode, under hard acceleration, they switch back over to gas. In this case, it doesn't. It doesn't make the assumption that you want both propulsion systems. So put another way, it's not a handicapped EV in this mode. It provides all the benefits like instantaneous torque, even under hard load. Is the acceleration as fast as working with the gas engine? No. But is it decent? Yeah. So what have we learned today other than change is inevitable? Well, this is unusually good and exceeds expectations for what it is. But more importantly, this is, yes, a go-fast SUV, but arguably it's far more than that. It's a test bed. It's a rolling research and development lab of technology we're going to see in future M cars. So you and I should most likely keep a tab on where it ends up next. And that brings us to the wish list. And here I have something pedantic for this vehicle specifically. The roof. I get where you're going with this whole stylish headliner and light show. You're borrowing a trick from your cousin, the Starlight headliner. But if I'm pushed, as well as the kind of people that would buy a vehicle like this, we would want a panoramic sunroof over a fancy headliner. Or maybe you could try to do both. But I'm one man, and this is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all word, MotoManTV all word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I do need to leave you with a very interesting backstory on this. The name, the XM, that's obviously a car you and I have known for many years from both France and Italy, sorta. Well, they didn't steal the name. They didn't say, screw you, we're just moving on to Tren. They actually called him and said, hey, do you mind if we use the name? And you're like, you know what? Go ahead. Till I see you in the next episode, bis später.